In my world, this is a lot about the Dodd-Frank Act, which is the act that was put on the books to address financial reform. Now, the Dodd-Frank Act solves problems that existed in 2008, so it is intended to solve exactly what happened back then. But more importantly, in my view, it's also intended to address at least part of the underlying reasons behind those problems. And to me, the underlying reasons behind those problems date from a period leading up to the Glass-Steagall Act repeal, where the banking sector, the financial sector in the United States got extraordinarily concentrated, and then in 2008 got even more concentrated as Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch, in one way or form exited the world in terms of independent entities, at least. And Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs became commercial banks as opposed to investment banks. They became commercial banks to stabilize their positions so that they wouldn't go under. So now what's happened is there's a tremendous concentration of power and market share at unprecedented levels, much more than existed in 2008. So issues like too big to fail, but more importantly, issues like the oligopolistic way that the markets work are even more prevalent today than they were even back in those days. So the Dodd-Frank Act seeks to solve some of the problems, specific problems associated with 2008, but also to carve back on that oligopolistic way of structuring ourselves. And too big to fail has a couple of provisions. One is a resolution provision that talks about the process for resolving a too big to fail bank that goes bust. I'm not going to talk about that much, but I will talk a lot about the Volcker Rule. The Volcker Rule, named for the former chairman of the Fed, addresses banks with insured deposits and access to the Federal Reserve window. The thought being that those kinds of those commercial banks are always going to be too big to fail if they have any size at all. Now, what's happened is that this group of banks, just to give you an idea, just to throw out a couple of statistics, currently, or for the last few years, with a dip after 2008, roughly speaking, the entire amount of profits generated by the U.S. economy, 33% of those profits go to the financial sector, which is an unprecedentedly large amount. Primarily, the difference between historic levels and current levels associated with the large banks and trading. Dallas Fed released a study that observed that something like 55% of all assets owned by banks are owned by the top 5 banks in the United States. So the concentration is remarkable. The Volcker Rule seeks to address that, and I'll tell you how in a minute, but it goes back somewhat to the Glass-Steagall division of banks into commercial banking, taking deposits and making loans, and investment banking, dealing with securities and derivatives markets. Another major area in the Dodd-Frank Act deals with derivatives, of financial weapons of mass destruction, as it was once referred to. Derivatives are extraordinarily complex instruments. I spent several years of my life thinking about measuring risk in derivatives, and basically concluded that attempting to be something like an economist was more precise. You can't measure the damn things. So one of the issues here is derivatives are dealt with by making dealers and big companies that deal in derivatives register and rules apply, requiring all derivatives in large part to be cleared, meaning the derivatives are all transacted through a central system that manages risk, a clearinghouse, and price transparency on a pre-trade basis and a post-trade basis, so people can start understanding what's going on in the marketplace and what the prices are. But a major premise to all this is that one could simply require capital reserves of financial institutions. But how do you know how much capital reserve is required, like in the Basel process? How do you know how much capital is required if you don't know what the damn risk is? Excuse my damn again, but I'm making a point here. The fact is, if you go to J.P. Morgan and the London Whale, well, there was another part of the bank dealing with those same derivatives. And in the two parts of the bank, the derivatives were priced in the two parts of the bank massively differently, the risk was. There's a Princeton professor named Brunermeyer who's done a piece that observes that within major banks, derivatives can be priced as much as 17% differently in different parts of the banks on a regular basis. I don't think either one of them got it right. It's all wrong. So the point here is a lot of the pricing of derivatives, you understand, is not by going and looking at a market price, but by asking the trading desk what you think the thing's worth. Think about that. You ask the trading desk what you think the thing's worth. There is a little bit of conflict of interest there. So the point here is that if you're going to require capital for everything and you don't know how to measure it, how much capital do you need? Problem. So you actually have to change people's behavior, change what they actually do.